3 twisted assassins were carrying out a massacre right inside the hotel. At the same time, it was the peak moment when the world's top assassins gathered here. But before these assassins could show off for long, they had already led themselves into a death trap. Watching their brutal fights, the mysterious woman who stepped out of the elevator couldn't help but get involved. In the blink of an eye, the situation turned upside down, and the assassins realized things had gone terribly wrong, so they had no choice but to scatter and flee in panic. But why were these cold, ruthless killers who showed no mercy all gathered here? The story starts with these 2 men in front of us. Detectives Richard and Carruthers were closely monitoring the underground crime boss Cerna, who had been responsible for more than 130 murders, but the police couldn't find any evidence. Just when everyone was at a dead end, Cerna happened to fall ill and needed to be hospitalized. The higher-ups saw this as the only chance to gather evidence of his crimes and immediately sent Richard and Carruthers to monitor him. But this task was a real burden for the 2 of them. To carry it out, they had to stay in the car for 20 hours straight. Yet Cerna made no moves at all. Just when they were about to collapse from exhaustion, the surveillance device next to them suddenly reacted. It turned out that Cerna had cancer and only had 3 months left to live. Therefore, in his final moments, he entrusted the second in command of the mafia to issue a massive bounty, $1 million for the heart of the magician Buddy Israel. This news, once released, caused a stir in the assassin world. To ensure the plan went off without a hitch, Cerna had even planted a mysterious Swedish agent. This made Richard and Carruthers feel an ominous sign and immediately reported it to their superiors. But who exactly was Buddy, and why was Cerna willing to spend millions of dollars to buy his life? It turned out that Buddy was originally a famous magician. Not only was he a magician, but he also brazenly associated with major gangs, and he was loved by the audience for his unique charm. But for someone at the peak of fame like him, he gradually became dissatisfied with his current life. So, in order to achieve higher power, Buddy began to collude with the mafia. With his excellent communication skills, he became a close confidant of Cerna. However, Buddy also fell into the bad habits of the mafia, starting to form alliances with criminals, committing arson, murder, robbery, and engaging in all sorts of evil deeds. But thanks to the mafia's protection, Buddy was not punished by the law. It seemed like he would continue to spiral down into depravity. But as Buddy's position in the mafia grew, he began to harbor intentions of seizing power. To satisfy his desires, he began working secretly within the mafia, successfully gaining his own followers. As a result, Cerna's influence began to wane. But Buddy, being originally a magician, despite his excellent communication skills, no longer had Cerna's protection. The police quickly seized upon Buddy's weaknesses. Just when it seemed like he would face the full brunt of the law, the FBI extended an offer to cooperate with him, wanting to use him as a trigger to dismantle the entire mafia organization. Faced with the possibility of a reduced sentence, Buddy was astonished by the offer and immediately agreed to the police's plan. The underground crime boss quickly became a cooperating witness for the FBI. However, before both sides could act, the mafia unexpectedly released a huge bounty to ambush everyone, catching them off guard. In such a critical situation, Buddy certainly wouldn't meet with the police easily and could only hide out in his luxurious penthouse apartment. But the massive bounty on his head wouldn't disappear just like that. And with the relentless pursuit of countless top assassins, it remained uncertain whether Buddy could escape this disaster. Meanwhile, the FBI's superiors received news from Richard and Carruthers and quickly called an emergency meeting. To ensure Buddy's safety, they spent the entire night reviewing the mafia members' records, including the infamous crime boss Cerna's profile. The records showed that Cerna had suddenly appeared in the public eye like a ghost. He had meticulously planned his cruel moves when the mafia was still on the rise. In order to combat criminal syndicates, the FBI had once sent their most famous agent Heller to infiltrate and investigate. To ensure the mission's success, the FBI not only gave Heller a new identity, but even used the most advanced cosmetic surgery techniques to alter his appearance. Under this highly secret plan, Heller successfully gained the trust of the crime boss and infiltrated the mafia. However, the joy was short-lived, as Cerna's sudden appearance in the broader public eye helped him uncover Heller's identity as an undercover agent, and he killed him on the spot. Afterward, Cerna's power quickly rose in the area, surpassing even the criminal syndicates. Meanwhile, in the wake of the police's overnight meeting, the assassin factions, upon receiving the bounty announcement, also began preparing to take action. The first to receive the bounty notice were the assassin sisters Jogjiel Kala and Saris Kala. Although they were newcomers in the assassin world, they had already made made quite a name for themselves due to their flawless track record. Next was the artist Ferment John. No one had ever seen his real face. He relied on his exceptional skills in disguise to kill without being seen. Then the Tremor brothers also received the bounty notice. Just looking at their clothes, one could tell they were extreme believers in aesthetics, violence, and despised sneaky tactics. For every mission, they never made a plan. They relied entirely on raw muscle to win. It seemed like this was the most fearsome group of assassins, but the deadliest assassin in the world still hadn't appeared. This person was known as Death, a name that sent shivers down people's spines. He initially worked for the CIA, and later became a professional mercenary. He could endure any form of brutal torture, and there was even a time when Death was captured by the police. To avoid his identity being revealed, he ruthlessly bit off all his fingers. Because of his brutal style, the assassin community had given him the nickname Death. In addition, not only were these assassins drawn to the huge bounty, but even 3 retired police officers were tempted by the money and got involved. At this point, the 5 assassin groups were all in position, and the FBI was also acting in time. They sent Richard and Carruthers to the hotel where Buddy was staying to provide close protection. The other FBI agents secretly coordinated with them, preventing any accidents from happening to Buddy. However, despite their heightened vigilance, the target was still indulging in a life of debauchery in his luxurious apartment. When the FBI agents arrived at the hotel, they immediately felt a headache. But since this was an important target that needed protection, they still had to inspect and eliminate any risks in his room. Meanwhile, the assassins who had received the bounty had also made corresponding plans. The assassin sisters planned to use their beauty to approach Buddy. At that moment, Vinny would be the first to arrive at the hotel where the target was staying. When Buddy invited the girls in, she would seize the opportunity to blend in and capture Buddy. Lily would be on sniper duty, watching the situation outside from above for Vinny, and ready to support the retreat. The 3 retired police officers also had a plan for the assassination. They rented hotel staff uniforms and planned to use the excuse of cleaning the room to sneak into Buddy's room and complete the assassination. However, before the retired group could start their action, they were stopped by an uninvited guest. The Tremor brothers, upon looking at their victims' bodies, couldn't help but mock them. When they got tired of their game, they tossed the bodies into the river. However, at that moment they had no idea that their reckless actions would bring about a disaster much greater than they could have imagined. Seeing the hotel uniforms in front of them, the Tremor brothers immediately took over their opponent's plan and began the assassination. The assassin known as Death had a similar plan. However, while the Tremor brothers disguised themselves as hotel staff, Death prepared to use the identity of an FBI agent to approach the target. Perhaps he thought that using the FBI agent identity would easily allow him to reach the highest floor. However, the reality didn't unfold as he expected. Due to Cerna's bounty notice, the highest floor, where Buddy was staying, was under strict protection. Even though he was disguised as an agent, without security clearance, Death was not allowed access to the top floor. Therefore, to succeed in his assassination, he decided to go to the security office. He used the excuse that the hotel security was inadequate, angrily confronting the staff in an attempt to gain permission to reach the top floor where Buddy was being protected. However, seeing his clumsy performance, the security staff clearly didn't believe him. Frustrated by their lack of cooperation, Death lost his patience and killed the security guard on the spot. Compared to the progress of the other 4 assassin groups, the artist Ferment John was clearly moving much faster. He had already infiltrated the hotel's basement and taken out one of Buddy's men. Immediately after, he used his opponent's identity to gain approval from the security staff to go to the top floor. Meanwhile, Richard and Carruthers, still unaware of the assassin's infiltration, received news from their colleagues, who had found a body near the hotel's lake. After a preliminary investigation, the police discovered a receipt for the purchase of a hotel staff uniform on the victim. Richard and his team immediately realized that something was wrong. They confirmed that the assassin had most likely disguised himself as hotel staff to sneak into the hotel. They quickly informed the hotel, ordering that no hotel staff should be allowed access to the top floor. However, Richard was a step too late. The Tremor brothers had already used their hotel staff disguise to sneak into the hotel and were heading to the elevator to go to the top floor. Along the way, they encountered Vinny, another assassin, and sensed a similar aura in him. The two immediately recognized each other's identities and silently agreed not to interfere with one another. After killing the security guard, Death continued with his assassination plan. He removed his FBI agent uniform and changed into a security guard outfit, using the access card to the top floor of his victim to take the elevator. All the assassins began heading toward the top floor. But who among them would be the final victor, claiming the $1 million? Meanwhile, Ferment John had used his disguise disguise skills to reach the top floor and began searching for his target. Luckily, at that moment, Buddy was in the bathroom, narrowly escaping a deadly fate. However, Ferment John didn't have the patience to wait for his target to emerge. To calm his frustration, he took the opportunity, when the large bodyguard wasn't paying attention, to kill him on the spot. Meanwhile, Buddy was still unaware of the situation outside his room, staying in the bathroom to compose himself. He had just received a call from his lawyer, revealing that Buddy didn't actually want to be a cooperating witness. He only wanted to use this opportunity to reduce his sentence. When the police demanded that he provide evidence of the mafia's crimes, Buddy made various excuses and only managed to provide 1 or 2 small pieces of information. With this exploitation of the situation, how could the FBI be satisfied? They immediately demanded that he disclose all the mafia's crimes, but Buddy had a strong enough support system. He believed that the police needed him, so he continued to act according to his own will, trying to cover up the truth. Then came the massive bounty from Cerna. Now, he was completely dependent on the police for protection. The FBI was clearly aware of this and seized the opportunity to once again demand that Buddy reveal the truth about the mafia's crimes. If not, they would withdraw their protection. Once he lost their protection, Buddy would have no way out but death. Under pressure, Buddy, although unwilling, had no choice but to agree to the police's demands. Meanwhile, during this phone call, the bodyguard overheard the conversation. This bodyguard, who had once been a member of the mafia and committed numerous crimes, now learned that Buddy was about to testify to the police. He pleaded with Buddy, asking for mercy due to their long-standing relationship, hoping to be given a way out. However, with their personal interests at stake, could the two come to an agreement? Meanwhile, Richard and his team arrived at the scene, where they saw the tragic state of the body. To prevent Buddy from being assassinated, Carruthers decided to protect him at the hotel alone, while Richard stayed behind at the crime scene to continue his investigation. Little did they know, this would be their final goodbye. Upon reaching the hotel, Carruthers immediately took the elevator to the top floor. To his surprise, he found himself sharing the elevator with Death. As a seasoned agent, Carruthers instinctively observed his surroundings and noticed that although Death was dressed in a security uniform, his exposed fingers were covered in wounds. This reminded him of the notorious Death in the assassin world. To stop him from reaching the top floor, Carruthers took action first. However, Death was already on high alert. His sharp instincts as an assassin allowed him to sense Carruthers' gaze. The two immediately engaged in a fierce fight inside the elevator. Meanwhile, Vinny, unaware of what was happening in the elevator, received instructions from Lily that the girls Buddy had invited had entered the hotel. Vinny was preparing to take the elevator to blend in, but before she could reach it, the sounds of gunfire from Carruthers and Death were heard by Lily. She immediately realized that an assassin had acted before them. Just as they were worried, the police also heard the noises coming from the elevator. To prevent the assassin from reaching the top floor, they quickly shut down the elevator system. This interference halted the assassin sisters' plan. However, as the elevator stopped functioning, the Tremor brothers couldn't proceed with their original plan either. Thinking they had given up on the assassination, they instead began to repair the elevator and successfully restored its operation. Meanwhile, the bodyguard and Buddy still hadn't resolved their conflict. When the bodyguard made a careless remark, Buddy bluntly told him that he had hired him to protect him, not to take the fall for him. To express his anger, Buddy threw the poker chips in his hand, striking the bodyguard in the eye. This action completely enraged the bodyguard, who immediately pointed his gun at Buddy. Fortunately, Buddy reacted quickly and leaped into the bathtub, narrowly escaping the danger. But the bodyguard struck in the eye was not so lucky. Upon hearing the fierce gunfight from the top floor, the FBI quickly acted to protect Buddy. As a result, Ferment John was unable to complete the assassination and had to wait for another opportunity. However, as the FBI agents were escorting the bodyguard out, the elevator doors failed to open and began emitting a thick white smoke. It turned out that the Tremor brothers had failed to fix the elevator after all. They were still trapped inside but were unaware of their predicament. Meanwhile, Lily up high still had no idea what had happened. All she knew was that a violent gunfight was taking place on the top floor to prevent the $1 million bounty from falling into the hands of another assassin. She quickly urged Vinny to go to the top floor, but the elevator still wouldn't work. With no other options, Vinny forced open the elevator doors. To her shock, a horrifying scene unfolded before her eyes. Inside, Carruthers and Death were both unconscious. Meanwhile, Richard noticed that he couldn't get in touch with Carruthers. Fearing that his teammate might be in danger, he quickly led led the hotel's security team to check the situation. However, the chaos before Richard was far worse than he had anticipated. To prevent further trouble, he immediately ordered all hotel staff to be restricted from going to the top floor. As a result, the girls were kept in the hotel lobby. Once everything was under control, Richard ordered the security team to restore the elevator system. Soon after, he and his agents quickly took the elevator to the top floor. Meanwhile, Vinnie had not yet reached the elevator. She noticed the identification cards of the two unconscious men and deduced that they were federal agents. But Lily quickly dismissed Vinnie's assumption, revealing that through conversations with the other assassins, she knew that one of the two was Death. Thinking that Vinnie would continue with her assassination plan on them, Lily realized that she could seize the opportunity to eliminate this formidable competitor. However, their conversation was intercepted by Richard. To prevent further complications, Richard once again ordered the hotel to halt the elevator operation. Meanwhile, Buddy, still unaware of the danger drawing closer, was waiting for the girls to knock on his door. Unexpectedly, the top floor was sealed off by the hotel, and the girls could only wait in the lobby. At this point, it was just Buddy and his fake bodyguard left in the room. Ferment John, knowing that this was the perfect time to act, openly displayed his tools for the murder, but a phone call shattered the silence in the room. Buddy's lawyer informed him that the FBI had revoked his status as a cooperating witness and would withdraw the agents surrounding the hotel. Upon hearing this, Buddy immediately snapped to attention. Without the FBI's protection, he knew he had little chance of escaping death. In that instant, he decided to end his own life with a gun. Ferment John, still unaware of Buddy's actions, continued to prepare his tools for the murder. Even the mysterious Swedish man behind him couldn't wait any longer and directly called John. Hearing his impatience, John promised to speed up the process, claiming it would only take 3 more minutes to claim Buddy's heart. Meanwhile, Richard and his team arrived at the floor where Vinnie was. Discovering the chaotic scene in the elevator, he immediately ordered his agents to take cover. Vinnie, sensing the movement of the enemy, quickly hid in the blind spot of the elevator and called for Lily to provide backup. At that moment, the sounds of gunfire rang out. The violent exchange of shots roused Death, who had been unconscious. Seeing Vinnie in front of him, Death immediately fired, hitting her. The intense pain caused Vinnie to accidentally fire her gun, fatally shooting the woman who had just stepped out of the elevator. Seeing this, Carruthers, trying to protect Richard, summoned the last of his strength and fired several shots at Death. After a violent exchange of gunfire, the elevator fell silent again. The agents quickly moved to apprehend the assassins. Richard, able to enter the elevator, found Carruthers barely clinging to life. He was deeply saddened and immediately began administering first aid to his teammate. Meanwhile, Lily received news via communication equipment that Vinnie had been injured. Due to her obstructed line of sight, she quickly repositioned to a closer location to monitor the situation, watching the elevator approach the top floor. The question remained, would Lily be able to get Vinnie out safely? At the same time, with the elevator system restored, the Tremor brothers, who had been stuck, finally reached the top floor. However, the agents outside the elevator still didn't realize the danger that was looming. As soon as the Tremor brothers began their slaughter of the agents, the captured bodyguard acted quickly, shooting several rounds at one of the agents. The agent, caught off guard, was killed instantly. Seeing this, the eldest Tremor brother became furious and immediately grabbed a chainsaw, cutting through the chandelier in the hotel. However, this move also led him to his own demise. After a fierce battle, only one of the Tremor brothers remained. Faced with the death of his siblings, he immediately engaged in a final confrontation with the bodyguard. The question now was, who would emerge as the victor in the end? On the other hand, due to the recent gunfire, Vinnie's communication device was severely damaged, and Lily and Vinnie lost contact. To gather information about Vinnie's condition, Lily had no choice but to return to her sniper position. Using a high magnification scope, she attempted to assess the situation. However, in a cruel twist, she saw a woman lying dead who was dressed identically to Vinnie. Believing Vinnie had died in the gunfight, Lily lost all sense of reasoning and in a blind rage began firing furiously at Richard and his team. Amidst the intense barrage from Lily, Richard finally regained some composure and accepted the painful truth that Carruthers was gone. He ordered his subordinates to remove Carruthers' body from the hotel and made his way to the top floor to protect Buddy. Contrasting with Lily's overwhelming grief, Vinnie, still alive, reached the today top floor in the elevator and encountered the bodyguard and Tremor locked in combat. She immediately aimed her gun at Tremor, threatening him. Seeing the situation worsening, Lester Tremor reluctantly abandoned his quest for revenge. Seizing the opportunity when Vinnie wasn't paying attention, he stealthily slipped into the elevator and made his escape. Without waiting for the others to react, fully equipped agents soon arrived on the top floor. Upon seeing them, the bodyguard quickly embraced his rescuer and fled the top floor. Meanwhile, Ferment John had finally finally completed his preparations for the assassination. Just as he was about to strike, FBI agents burst into the room, guns drawn to stop his actions. However, John seemed prepared for this. Despite being caught by the agents, he showed no resistance. What hidden secret lay behind this calm acceptance? On the other hand, the bodyguard and Vinny had developed feelings for each other during their escape. At this moment, Vinny had long since forgotten about Lily and decided to retire, choosing to live a simple life in hiding with the bodyguard. But just as they were sharing sweet words, they ran into Richard. The death of Carruthers made him furious. Seeing Vinny in front of him, Richard immediately decided to kill her. Faced with the death threat, Vinny, not wanting to fight Richard, honestly told him that she wasn't responsible for Carruthers' death. She suggested that they act as though they had never met and continue with their respective plans. Richard eventually calmed down and agreed to her proposal. He then went to the top floor and confronted his superiors, questioning why they withdrew the police without notifying them, leading to the pointless deaths of Carruthers and several innocent agents. To his surprise, his superior seemed to have something to hide and was only focused on Buddy's safety, stating that the target needed urgent treatment for a heart condition. While the two were arguing, John seized the opportunity to steal a gun from one of the agents. Hearing the noise from the room, Richard instinctively knew that an assassin was inside, but his superior denied it and stopped him from entering the room to investigate. This gave John the opening he needed. He quickly disguised himself and managed to escape the pursuit of the agents, leaving the hotel. Meanwhile, Lily was still drowning in the pain of losing Vinny. When she finally came to terms with the reality of the situation, another harsh blow hit her. Vinny wasn't dead. Instead, she was sweetly embracing someone else. This immediately made Lily feel betrayed. However, as she came to her senses after the shock, dozens of agents appeared at her door, preparing to arrest her. On the other side, only Lester remained of the Tremor brothers. Just as he was celebrating his escape, retired Officer Taylor found him. It turned out that due to the Tremor brothers' oversight, Taylor was still alive. After being thrown into the lake, he had regained consciousness and escaped to a cabin in the woods. There, he had quietly vowed to make the Tremor brothers pay for their mistake. However, when Lester saw Taylor, he wasn't afraid. Instead, he handed Taylor the car keys in exchange for his life. He then turned and walked away. But given the arrogance in Lester's stride, would Taylor truly let him leave? Clearly, Lester had once again failed due to his own complacency. Meanwhile, Richard's mind was haunted by the images of his fallen colleagues, their tragic deaths replaying over and over again. At this point, some suspicions began to fall into place. Clearly, the higher-ups had withdrawn their protection from Buddy, but were now deeply concerned about his safety. Richard thought carefully and suddenly realized something was off. He immediately grabbed his gun and confronted his superior, threatening him to reveal the truth. Seeing Richard's determination, the superior's arrogance faded, and he confessed everything. It turned out that Heller wasn't killed by Cerna. After years of undercover work, Heller had become Israel, the boss Cerna. Years ago, he was ordered to infiltrate the mafia organization. The mission was a huge success, but when it came time for withdrawal, Heller refused to follow orders. He claimed that the evidence on the mafia wasn't complete and wanted to stay undercover longer within the organization. His unusual behavior raised suspicions with the FBI, and to prevent Heller from betraying them, the FBI secretly targeted him, even erasing his records. However, their assassination attempt on him failed, and instead, Heller rose through the ranks to become the mafia boss. The superior admitted that the mafia files Heller possessed were considered more valuable than Buddy's, which is why the plan was changed. But the truth was even more complicated. Due to the importance of Heller's files, the superior decided to allow him to undergo a heart transplant. It was then revealed that Buddy and Heller were father and son. Heller wasn't suffering from cancer as everyone had believed, but rather heart disease due to his old age. To survive, he had come up with the plan to take his own son's heart. Buddy, discovering his father's plan, had fled in fear. However, Heller and the mafia wouldn't let him escape. They issued a massive bounty and hired a professional Swedish cardiologist at a high price to carry out the transplant. Finally, the truth came out, but Richard was even more enraged. It wasn't just about Heller's mafia files anymore. It was the fact that this traitor, Heller, had caused the deaths of dozens of innocent agents, all to complete the heart transplant for him. In response to Richard's interrogation, the superior calmly stated that some minor losses were acceptable during the mission, and even used Richard's position to pressure him into keeping the secret. This action completely enraged Richard. In a fit of rage, he made a bold decision. After completing everything, he finally took his weapon and his police badge, placing them on the ground. Amid the superior's angry helplessness, he awaited his final fate. The deadly game triggered by the $1 million bounty had intertwined numerous complex stories, such as the vendettas between criminal gangs, the mental battles of the police, and the violent confrontations of the assassins, forming a wave of brutality laced with aesthetics. The film, not only inherits the raw grit of dark crime dramas, but also breaks the mold of traditional films in the genre with its absurd plot twists. The value of a film lies in its fame, while the value of a movie review lies in the experience it offers. The story ends here today. Thank you for watching the film. What did you think of it? Leave your comments below.